Hey everyone and welcome back. This week's video is a little different. It's impromptu due to a few things which happened in the past few weeks. If you watched my very first video, then you'll know that the primary flexibility goal I set myself for this year is the full pike position with head on shins and chest on thighs. I chose this for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because I don't enjoy it, and I think there's quite a lot of benefit in pairing the things that you do enjoy and you get on with things that you don't like, especially when they are going to be essential to other training. And secondly, for that very reason, it's a fundamental piece for a lot of gymnastics skills. I also managed to pick up a cold this week, which has been a lot of fun. So training has been pretty tough. I've managed to get through it, but I haven't really got any interesting updates to share, as it's been a case of survival more than anything else. So I've been working on this using the Jefferson curl approximately once every 4 to 5 days, and I've seen pretty reasonable progress. So I started on a completely flat surface on the floor, and I've been increasing the working depth slowly over time, and the best depth that I have achieved is 157 millimeters, which you can see in this video. However, I've had a really odd occurrence a couple of times when working these. On both occasions, I've experienced what I can only really describe as a real spasm in the region of the QL on my left side, and this is when rolling the spine back up to the standing position. You can see in this video there's clearly a bit of discomfort in the way that I shake my left leg, and it just doesn't look all that good. So my working theory is that there are a couple of things which are causing this. First of all, it's the site of an old injury, so I often have issues there. But also I think imbalances and discrepancies that exist between my legs can definitely be contributing to this. My legs are in fact different lengths, which I think is the case for most people, although it's usually quite minimal. You can see in this clip a little bit of a difference between my left and right hip. It doesn't look like it's an awful lot, but here it's definitely noticeable, so without question it is definitely going to contribute to other parts of the body further upstream. I also have a far more mobile left ankle than I do right, which has given me knee troubles in the past, and I think it's compounded by a weakness in my left glute, or it could be that the right is just exceptionally strong, and the left side is the same sides as the issue I had when performing the Jefferson curl. All that is to say, I've decided to change direction with my flexibility training ever so slightly, because I think this new development is a good reason to do so. I really don't want to compound an issue that may be there, and the fact that it's happened to me a couple of times says to me that there's probably a slightly different approach required to get around the problem and hopefully solve it. For the past year or so, I've actually spent quite a bit of time working on unilateral leg strength, so one leg at a time as opposed to both together, and for some reason it just didn't occur to me to approach flexibility the same way at the beginning of this year. But I feel like I've made a realization pretty quickly, so I'm more than happy to change now. I took this approach with strength training initially because my right leg is significantly stronger. The joints are more stable, but it's also tighter and less flexible. The left leg is the complete reverse of the right leg. It's weaker in every way, but it is more flexible. In the ankle, I've got far more range available in both dorsal and plantar flexion. The hip allows for a decent amount of both internal and external rotation, especially more external rotation than the right leg allows for, and I can tell that I do have greater calf and hamstring flexibility on this side. Essentially, the requirements of my legs are completely different. So if I continue with bilateral work, using strength as an example, I'm always going to be relying on the right leg in these exercises, such as back squats and front squats. Instead, I would much rather focus on the idea or the concept of structural balance, which was first brought to the and instead I would rather focus on the idea of structural balance, which I believe is a concept which was first brought to mainstream by Charles Poliquin. So by taking the imbalances out of the equation and working on my legs unilaterally, I feel as if I can focus on achieving structural balance both with strength and flexibility. Now, it's probably quite important for me to say I'm not sure it's ever possible to achieve equilibrium between the legs. I think you'll always have one which is slightly stronger, one which is weaker, one which is slightly more flexible, but I think the purpose of this style of training is actually to try and minimize the gap as much as possible, but not obsessing over the fact. So the result of this epiphany or realization is that I have decided to work on the front splits instead of the pike. The front splits require a good level of hip flexor flexibility, which is also going to be really important for some of the future goals I have, such as bridging and acrobatic arching. And without question, it will still contribute to my ability to achieve a full pike, because in the front splits there's a real demand on posterior chain flexibility and specifically the hamstring. So to determine my approximate starting point for the front splits, I have been using Emmet Louis's long lunge, currently with minimal warming up and just enough to feel comfortable and that I'm not going to injure myself when attempting this. My front split on both sides sits at 158 centimeters, which is the distance between the heel of the front foot and the toes of the back foot. So I'll use this as a way of measuring my progress. I want to work towards the front splits which are square at the hips, as opposed to being a more open position, which I think you tend to see more in ballet. So the front split appears to be a goal of both active flexibility and strength, and as far as I can tell there are two ways in which you can achieve this. The first is just by coaxing your nervous system into a relaxed state to allow you to end up in a full front split. The other way you can achieve this is by building the strength in the joints throughout the range of motion so you can actively pull yourself down into the position. Now the latter is the one that I'm after. I don't want to have to go through a particularly long relaxing routine in order to be able to get into the front splits, and I also want to be able to utilize the front split position in a lot of the other things that I will learn in the future. So I need it to be readily accessible to me at pretty much all times. So the routine that I'm going to use for this to start with comes directly from Emmet Louis, so I will share the routine that I'm using in the description and I'll provide a link to his video that I got the exercises from. Before we get to that, I just want to show a few videos of me testing out some of these exercises so you get a good idea of the level that I'm working at now. So first off is a quick test of hip flexor strength, where the goal is to raise the front leg up to 90 degrees from standing without losing body position. So that means not leaning back too much and also not bending the back knee if possible. I'm not quite there, but I'm also not too far off, and these were tested without any real warm-up, so I'm pretty confident I can gain the remaining few degrees or so that's required. So I aim to achieve this by using what Emmet refers to as an overcoming isometric drill, where you use an external weight or force to apply pressure from above to the working leg. And the goal here is to attempt to lift the weight up using a really forceful contraction of the hip flexor and the quad. So this is followed by an active drill where I'm aiming to reach a target, which is a little bit of a challenge but is also within reach. There seems to be quite a lot of evidence that task-orientated flexibility drills are a little bit more effective than simply just relaxing or focusing on the body part which you are aiming to improve. So next up is a set which is based on Emmet's SLP method, which means working on the shortening range. So in this instance it's the quads and the hip flexor, followed by the lengthening range, which will be the hamstring, and then finally some pulsing stretches, which is otherwise known as ballistic stretching, and this is done within the newly acquired range. I'm likely going to go a little easy on the pulsing to start with, or in some instances I may skip it, as it's not something I've done a lot of and it's generally considered a pretty advanced stretching technique. I think with a lot of flexibility training, part of the goal should be just to not get injured, because if you do, then you're definitely going to be adding weeks, if not months, onto the time it's going to take you to achieve a particular goal. So following this, I'll be working on the hip flexor of the back leg, which is really similar to the couch stretch, which I was using up until this stage, but this is way more intense. It's probably my favourite of all of them because of how hard going it is on the hip flexor. So the use of the external load in this instance is only 5 kilos, just allows you to acquire a deeper stretch for the working hip flexor. Then I'll be working the back leg again, but this time it's going to be the back of the rear leg, and specifically the glute, whose job it is to extend the hip. Again, this is an active drill, and the goal is not to relax into the position, but use the musculature to be able to pull yourself into the intended position. Finally, I'll be using a drill which requires active use of the entire front leg, and I believe the idea here is to slide in and out of an extended position heading towards the front splits using primarily the hamstring of the front leg. And it's also my understanding that the idea is also to use the newly acquired range which has been opened up in the previous exercises. So I am going to be working this program for the foreseeable. I don't have a specific deadline or kind of date in mind for when I want to achieve this. As with most of the other training, I am in no rush whatsoever. I'd rather work consistently each week and gain extra range of motion at a really sustainable pace, and get a solid front split that's accessible at all times rather than overstep and risk injury. And that is it for today's video. I will include the session in the description below along with a link to Emmet's video and channel. Be sure to check it out as it is nothing short of a goldmine for resources on flexibility training. As always, thank you for watching and for the support. This is a lot of fun for me producing these videos, so I hope it's as enjoyable for others to follow along. If that's the case, please do hit the thumbs up to help support the channel. Until next week, and happy training.